Welcome to Policy and Governance Perspectives, the official podcast of the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Join Dr. David Ramadan and Schar School experts as they engage in thought-provoking conversations with elected officials, policymakers, and thought leaders. Listen for in-depth discussions on policies, politics, governance, and career pathways, all designed to elevate your perspectives and expand your mind.
Welcome to another episode of Policy and Governance Perspectives, the official podcast of the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. I am your host, Dr. David Ramadan. Today, we are discussing intelligence, accountability, national security, and public trust, issues that sit at the heart of our democracy and our security. We are fortunate to have with us General Michael Hayden, a retired four-star Air Force general who served as director of both the National Security Agency and the Central Intelligence Agency, and who founded the Michael Hayden Center for Intelligence, Policy, and International Security here at George Mason University. The center brings together intelligence professionals, policymakers, scholars, students, and the public to have serious conversations about security and democracy. Also joining us is Mark Zaid, one of the country's leading national security attorneys. Mark's work focuses on national security law, government accountability, whistleblowers, security clearances, and Freedom of Information Act litigation. He founded the James Madison Project and co-founded Whistleblower Aid. And co-hosting with me is my Schar School colleague, Larry Pfeiffer, director of the Hayden Center. Larry brings deep experience in national security, intelligence, crisis management, analysis, collection, covert operations, and budgetary issues, and has helped make the Hayden Center one of Mason's signature platforms for informed public dialogue on intelligence and security. Today, we'll start with the Hayden Center, what it does, why it matters, and then move into bigger questions: secrecy and transparency, whistleblowers, politicization of intelligence, cyber threats, and how democratic societies can protect themselves without losing themselves. General, Mark, Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks.
General, let's start with you. In the first segment of this, we'll talk about the Hayden Center, why it exists, why it matters. Yep. Please tell us, this center that bears your name, why did you want to create it, and why at George Mason?
Yes, indeed. Well, first of all, I have aphasia. It's a little bit hard for me to say many things. It's almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, but I do it little by little. I can do it. So I'm glad I'm there. So thank you.
We're glad you're here as well, and God bless, General.
Thank you. So actually, we talk about intelligence a lot, and you can say many things really about intelligence. I was at CNN for 3.5 years, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And once in a while, I would say, no, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. But most of the time, I can. You see? So I think it's really good at GMU to talk about intelligence. That will be very important for GMU, but also for the American people.
So talking about intelligence, is that the gap that you were trying to fill? Or was there another gap in addition to that with starting the Hayden Center?
Well, no, it was part of what I want to say is we can talk about intelligence, and a lot of times, no, I like a movie, but that's not right. It's not really good at all. Let's talk about intelligence and people. Well, for example, I live about 5 miles from CIA, a lot of people in this neck of the woods, you know? And when I go to the McLean family restaurant for breakfast or lunch, I'm saying, okay, I know him, I know him, I know him, and so on. They're all part of CIA. Okay? So let's talk about that as well. I think it's important to talk about that because there's a lot going on, and I'm glad we have done it now at GMU. Let's talk about a lot of things, you know. And by the way, like I said, most of the time it'll be okay. It's not, what's the word? It's very important. It's very important.
Important work indeed. And for some of our listeners that are not familiar with the McLean family restaurant, I don't live in McLean, but every time I've been there been there numerous times with friends, you're almost always going to find either somebody of the stature of the general or a member of Congress or somebody you've seen on TV. It's the McLean crowd's hangout, the who's who of that area. Thank you, General. Larry, let me ask you something. As director of the center, how do you describe the mission to students or visitors who may not come from national security backgrounds?
Sure. So to feed off of what the general said, we see our job as demystifying the intelligence community and the intelligence business for our students, for the general public, and we see our mission as plumbing a little deeper than you might find on a cable news network television show, or than you might see in, as the general said, in a movie or a TV series. Have serious conversations around serious topics. We're more than happy to talk about the imperfections of the intelligence community and how, in a democracy, intelligence can be held accountable for possible abuses or overstepping bounds. So we just see our job as helping to fill that void of knowledge that most Americans have about the U.S. intelligence business. Too often, because of the classification levels, as the general discussed, too often people are unable to talk about what the intelligence community can do. And it leaves the battlefield, in essence, open to those who wish to do the intelligence community harm or our country harm, or those who perhaps hold a grudge against the intelligence community for some past or perceived abuse that they felt that they suffered. And so you can end up with a very skewed vision of what the intelligence business is actually about, and that can be dangerous for our country if our Congress or other players act against the intelligence community based on bad information. So we're trying to fill that gap.
Excellent, thank you. Tell us a little bit about the programs that you run at the center.
Sure. So we've been doing this since 2017, fall of 2017. And we are focused on putting on speaking events. We do them in the evenings, usually on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. And we will feature panel discussions or occasional one-on-one interviews with either current or former government officials, academics, think tank experts, journalists, and we have plumbed into topics as serious as recently we did a great event on this Havana syndrome anomalous health incidents, which is attacks on diplomats and intelligence officers around the globe by some adversary, possibly Russia. And we've done topics as light as interviewing former intel officers who now write spy novels for a living in their retirement. So we've had a lot of fun, but we also can dig into some pretty serious topics at a time. We are averaging at the moment about 6 to 8 events, and we do them mostly within the academic calendar year, so from September through May. We may do the occasional summer event if we feel a little inspired. If folks are interested in seeing the kinds of events we've done, we have a Hayden Center channel on YouTube. They can see every event we've done going back to 2017. They're free. They're available to the public. I've received messages from school teachers, from civic associations around the country who ask, permission to use our material, and I say, hey, you don't have to ask permission. That's why we put it out there. So encourage folks to go check that out. And we have a Hayden Center website as well that has those events and talks a little bit more about our mission.
Excellent, thank you. And in general, why does a public university in general, and George Mason Schar School in particular, why is it important for them to play a role in intelligence and national security? Education, we're talking, of course.
And for me?
Yeah.
So George Mason University is ideally located. We're in the Washington metropolitan area. George Mason University and the Schar School in particular values the expertise of practitioners and former practitioners. So if you come to George Mason University Schar School, you're going to get an education not just from fantastic academics and researchers, but you're also going to be getting classes from people who actually did the job, people like General Hayden. We've had Andy McCabe, former FBI acting director, on our staff. Michael Morell's been on our staff. You really, it's hard to underestimate the value of hearing from people who've actually done these really difficult jobs. And so I think our geographic proximity, the stable of academics and previous practitioners on our staff really can be valuable to anybody who might be interested in either coming to the school or just learning from what a center like the Schar School and the Hayden Center has to offer.
Thank you. Mark, on to you. From the outside legal and accountability world, how do you see institutions like the Hayden Center at the Schar School?
They are essential, and it is fantastic the role that these type of entities play, and especially the Hayden Center. So I am the true outsider. As much as I've worked on intelligence issues for over 3 decades, my entire professional legal career, I have never been inside the federal government. I never worked inside the CIA or elsewhere. I've always been out there to hold them accountable. And in fact, if you had probably asked the General or Larry what they thought of me when they were back in office, they'd have a different opinion, and vice versa than later on, which is exactly
They may still have that opinion of you.
They might. But it's exactly why it is so important. Justice Brandeis said over a century ago, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it's all about transparency. And oftentimes you need to get that from former officials within the community. And the last, I'd say I trace it back because I represent a lot of people who write the books, the novels, but the nonfiction books, and help them get them cleared. Since the late 60s, there's a shift in those who come out of the intelligence agencies of generally a more able willingness to tell their stories. And that's a good thing. And to be able to interact with people like General Hayden, like Larry, who served as chief of staff, is phenomenal. To have that kind of access, to be able to go to these public events, to be able to raise your hand or watch online and type in a question, is such a great opportunity. And for the students who go, oh my God, even better to be. I mean, I went to school in upstate New York, and pre-internet, we didn't have the opportunity to have this type of interaction with people who led the government and made worldwide decisions, on a daily basis. It's a phenomenal opportunity.
So would you also say, besides the opportunity of interacting and learning in general, it helps demystify the intelligence and what public thinks of the CIA and other agencies?
There's no doubt, particularly because it humanizes it. I mean, again, for the most part, like, I knew who General Hayden was during the time that I was engaged with cases at the CIA and the NSA, but I never interacted with officials at that level, especially when I was younger. But even now, as a more seasoned lawyer, I'm not typically personally interacting. I'm not in those social circles or business circles. But to be able to meet, see, listen to individuals who spent their time in that community and realize, you know what? We have the same interests about this. Oh, we go fishing. Oh, I love antique books. We go to Nats games, whatever it might be. That really does make all the difference in the world. I tell you, when I litigated against the CIA, pre-General Hayden's time, there was one lawyer who was the chief of litigation who literally I despised. If I had to describe who my hated adversary was, it was this guy, and he felt the same way. And a mutual colleague in the government said, I know both of you. You guys would like each other. You need to talk. And it wasn't until he retired, and we've talked about this publicly together on panels, when he retired and we got together and we realized, you know what? We do like each other, and we have the same interests, and we talk and work together now all the time. If I had had that during the time, even though we represent separate entities, that lesson, which I think the center helps convey, to be able to get to know someone humanistically, personally, is so invaluable.
Thank you. You just reminded me of a recent, not incident, but something that happened. A leading national Jewish figure in the United States called me and asked me about a Palestinian American individual. And he was like, I can't believe he said that, blah, blah, what do you know about it? I said, look, if I put you both together in a restaurant and not know where you stand on this issue and where he stands on that issue, you two will share a beer and enjoy it and probably talk about the kids and soccer and everything else, because knowing both of you, you have both that great personality. But the issue on hand here is where you disagree on, not the individual. So you're absolutely right on that. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to intelligence and democracy. Talk about secrecy, about trust, about accountability. General, I'll go to you first.
Yes.
You led both the NSA and the CIA during some of the most consequential national security moments of the last quarter century. In plain English, what do intelligence agencies owe the American people, and what can they never fully disclose?
That's a great, great question, and believe it or not, what I'm going to say is you can say almost anything. Now, there is some that you can't say it. Like, for example, I know some covert actions, okay, that I can't say that ever again, okay? But most of the time, I can say it. Okay. Like, for example, when I was writing my book, okay, I want to say this. Can I say that or not? The CIA would say, maybe, maybe not. But most of the time, I was able to say it. Okay. So that's very, very important. Like, when I was done with CIA and NSA, but there was a real problem for Snowden, okay? And people wanted to talk with me on TV a lot. And I was able to do it before CIA and NSA. They can't do anything, but I can. And I did a lot. And I actually said, what's going on right now is actually legal. It is legal. Now, would I do that? Maybe not. I would say, maybe I would do that, but I wouldn't do this. But it was legal. Let's talk about this, okay? It's just people mad. No, let's talk about this, because maybe I would say, I think I would do this. But a couple of times I would say, well, it's legal, but let's not do that.
So, but you did that in your individual capacity after you left.
That's correct.
Do the agencies owe us as citizens information?
Absolutely. So I went on TV when I was CIA director, okay? Now, I didn't do it a lot, but I did it because it's very important for CIA. The director talks about many things. Okay. So that's when I was able to do it. By the way, I talked to the president and said, Mr. President, I want to do this. Do you think it's okay? And the president said, well, let's try it. And I was on Sunday morning. Okay. And it was okay. And so I did it 2 or 3 times. I think that's very, very important. You know, I was a servant of the people, and I wanted to say something about it. And if I didn't do that, that would be, first of all, wrong for CIA, but is also wrong for our democracy.
Thank you, General.
If I can just jump in here.
Yes, please.
The general has commented in the past that there's 2 things that are inherent in our American democracy, going back to our earliest days, and it's a distrust and a wariness of extreme secrecy and extreme power.
And that's important. That's very important. So like you, Larry, that's exactly correct. And by the way, I'm glad of that. I am really glad of that.
But because of that, it's incredibly important as in essence a social compact between these intelligence agencies and the American people, that there be venues and avenues for explaining what we do and why we do what we do, how, what is or isn't legal, what is or isn't moral or ethical. In the 1970s, the way this nation decided we would handle that was through oversight committees of the Congress. So you had the House Intel Committee and the Senate Intel Committee with select members who would hear the gory details about what we were doing. And the notion was they could then represent to the American people that this was okay, or we stopped this because it wasn't okay. But with the advent of 24-hour news cycles and instant communications and social media, there are many of us who question whether congressional oversight committees are enough to help guarantee the establishment and maintenance of trust with the American people about what we are not doing. And General Hayden's view, going back decades now, was that no, perhaps that wasn't enough, and perhaps key players at these different agencies need to be getting out and talking about what they can talk about. In some cases, that means disclosing more of our history, talk about our past successes, talk about our past failures and how we corrected them, because maybe you can't talk about what you're doing today because you don't want to expose sources, methods, put humans at risk. So it's a tricky business to try to do that in a way that doesn't expose those secrets. But in a democratic society, I think we believe that that's an important role that we as former employees and we as a Hayden Center can take on.
It's refreshing to hear that from both of you. Mark, if you don't mind, let me ask you, your work often sits at the point where secrecy, law, whistleblowing, constitutional rights collide. Where do you think government secrecy is necessary? I know you would prefer not to have any of it, probably from the outside, but where do you think it's necessary? And then where does it become harmful?
So because I've had a unique role as a lawyer for spies, some of the most deepest undercover operatives at the CIA and elsewhere within the U.S. government, I actually would say I agree that there needs to be a certain level of secrecy. I think anyone who has had authorized access to classified information, of which I've had a security clearance at the TSSCI level for many years, over the course of years, knows 2 things. One, there's absolutely information that needs to remain secret, especially involving human sources, because lives could be at risk. My clients' lives could be at risk. More likely, their sources, assets, and technology and things may be at risk. And that there is unbelievable overclassification. And there, as we often point to in many of our Freedom of Information Act litigation and during efforts to declassify information, I can point to countless public statements of senior government officials who, while they're still government officials, are saying, yeah, at least 50% or more of information is overclassified. And that's something we need to deal with, and we've not dealt with it very well. But there does need to be a balance. Now, I co-founded Whistleblower Aid, which provides pro bono for free legal representation to whistleblowers in the aftermath of Snowden to make sure there would not be another Snowden. Because I think what he did was unbelievably damaging, completely illegal, and entirely unnecessary in the breadth that he did. And I wanted to be able to make sure there's a pathway for lawful whistleblowing within the intelligence community, whether it's to bring it to, as Larry said, the oversight committees, which we can have a major debate about as to how effective that is, or to bring it to the inspector generals, which were created at the same time in the aftermath of Watergate, which we can have a great debate of whether that's effective or not, especially now during the second Trump administration. But even before that, we could talk about it. There's a lot of work that needs to still be done to strengthen the system, but there can be an incredibly powerful, strong, and fair balance to protect national security, but also to conduct proper oversight of the U.S. government in general and the intelligence community specifically.
So what I'm hearing is you're differentiating between a genuine whistleblower for good versus a leaker that is leaking for damage.
So yeah, for those of us in DC, when we say leaker, we are generally talking about someone who has illegally disclosed classified information. Obviously, the term generically is used all around the country, and it doesn't have to refer to classified information. But for those of us inside the Beltway, that's generally what we're talking about. And yeah, I mean, I teach lawyers about whistleblower laws, and I will openly say Ed Snowden, Chelsea Manning, these individuals, and I represented Chelsea for the classification review of her book, the recent book, not at the time when she disclosed to WikiLeaks. They are not lawful whistleblowers. People generically may see them as whistleblowers. I get that, but they don't meet the legal definition that they are entitled to any lawful protections because they went outside the norms, outside the rules, and unlawfully disclosed classified information unnecessarily is what I would say, and which is why I would have represented both of them had they come to me, and we would have done it the right way, as I did with the intelligence community whistleblower in the first Trump impeachment, who we made sure that that information was transmitted properly, lawfully, from within the intelligence community to the congressional oversight committees. And I mean, that's a separate topic of now what we can talk about what's going on, but that's the proper way to do these things, and it can be done right.
So Mark, with all the reforms that you helped champion and with the different legislation and executive orders that now govern effective whistleblowing, how would you grade the government in how they abide by those rules, regulations, and laws? And if the grade's anything less than an A-, are there additional reforms that you think are necessary to make it more effective and to protect, to both protect legitimate whistleblowers and encourage those who would be wanting to leak to pursue the more lawful avenues?
So the second Trump administration is, in fact, very different from the first Trump administration. And what it has shown is how weak our democracy actually is because of how much we rely on norms in order to implement the laws. And the norms were very much the strength that held everything together as we pursued the different implementation of the laws. So right now, I would give us, probably, I don't know if I would necessarily say an F, because there are still very good people inside the government, people I trust, people I know who want and try to do the good thing, but it's not much higher above an F. I mean, there are inspector general's offices that I just do not trust any longer. I cannot bring a whistleblower to them. There are members of Congress, as there always have been, where I cannot trust. There are committees that perhaps I don't trust as much, and I have to go about doing things a different way. The judicial system has maintained its integrity, its nonpartisanship far more than the other two branches of government, but the path for whistleblowers to go to the judiciary is limited. We create it every so often. There are ways I can do FOIA lawsuits, I can do pre-publication review First Amendment actions, but it is very, very complicated to be able to balance or navigate that line to make sure that the clients, the whistleblowers, don't get in trouble, or us, the lawyers, because as is known, I've been targeted as the lawyer for whistleblowers. So we're going to have to really revisit the system post Trump/MAGA power to see what we can do to restore the independence of some of the entities and the institutions to be free from undue influence. And I think we're going to have a very monumental task ahead of us for it, unfortunately.
You know what? I think about that a lot, and it'll take time, maybe 10 or 15 years, I'm afraid. It's complicated without getting into great depth, because that would be a whole podcast itself. But the notion of the unitary executive theory, which is basically the president is a king, that the president is not subject to oversight by either other branch of government, was Pandora's box. It was the demon in Pandora's box that never really was alive in the country's history. And because they've opened that box, that demon can never be put back in. We can restore the norms because of the individuals who will be in power again, but another individual can emerge 15, 20 years from now and just revive the demon again, and we can go tumbling down the same path that we've been in for the last, what feels like a century, but it's only been not even a year and a half. I want to say something because I think it is important for this episode. So I was CIA NSA director after 9/11, and I talked to they called me and they talked to the president, okay? And I did some things after 9/11 that I'm very proud of. I really am. And now they know what's happening 4 or 5 years later. Some of them, people said, oh, that's bad. Other times it was good. I'm glad of that. I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't do it now. You understand?
Why?
Under the current circumstances.
Under the current administration, oh no, that's not right. We won't do it. It may be legal, but I won't do it, period.
Give us an example. Give us an example, General. What are you talking about?
Larry, talk about stellar wind.
So post 9/11, one of the gaps that was identified by the intelligence community and by a review of the intelligence community were laws and regulations that limited our ability to share information across law enforcement and intelligence lines, but also there were limitations on how an organization like NSA, which collects signals and communications, it prevented NSA from collecting communications that traverse the United States without obfuscating identities and of individuals who might have been communicating. When General Hayden was asked what capabilities did he need in order to be more successful and effective against
aggressive.
Yeah, to be more aggressive. One of the things he identified was the ability to target more deeply U.S. communications, looking for foreign terrorist connections, not targeting U.S. communications to look and target U.S. people, but to target foreigners who were wanting to do harm to the United States, who were communicating inside the United States with potential other terrorists or potential Americans who might have been supporting them. And so under the existing law, there was nothing that was going to allow that to take place. So the president, using his Article 2 authorities to protect the United States, his commander-in-chief authorities, authorized General Hayden to use NSA's tools and techniques to target those communications. And the committee, senior leadership of the intel committees were briefed about this at the time, but no staff members and no broad membership of the committees were informed. That activity was eventually exposed. Was that Snowden who exposed that?
No.
No, it was even before Snowden, right?
Yes, it was. I was almost CIA director now.
Right. So it's years later. It gets exposed by the press as to what NSA was doing. It gets broadly mischaracterized that we were targeting U.S. people, blah blah blah, and it becomes a bit of a controversy. And then there was questions raised as to whether Article 2 was sufficient. Was that a sufficient ground for justification for this activity? And so ultimately, Congress got involved. We don't go into all the gory details, but lots of Congress people who were briefed on this said they never were briefed on it, and they were horrified that this actually happened. That was their public face at the time. But ultimately and ironically, laws that were passed under the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, something referred to as Section 702 today, actually ultimately authorized NSA to do what they were doing under the Article 2 authorities, and actually more. So
more.
Actually more than we were doing under the Article 2 authorities by themselves.
But supposedly under supervision of FISA court, right?
Yes.
That's correct. So what I want to say is I did this. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad they talk about it. And by the way, people that didn't like it, that's American democracy. It's okay. It is okay. And I did it, but I wouldn't do it now.
Why?
This government, I'm afraid of this government.
But they are doing it now, General, right?
Well, I think the concern is that they would be doing they potentially would be abusing this authority to actually target U.S. people for political purposes, and not for legitimate counterterrorism or counterproliferation or other reasons. And at the time, a lot of people will look at us and say, well, my gosh, General, why didn't you say at the time that we need to put this in front of Congress and have a vote, et cetera, et cetera? Well, you have to put yourself in the I like to call it the 9/12 mindset. On September 12th, if the American people thought that we were going to sit and have long-winded civic debate in the halls of Congress about this authority and have it take months and months for something to be passed and run the risk of having another 9/11 attack happen in the country, they would have crucified everybody in the administration. And so the decisions were made, to use the president's Article 2 authorities. I guess I would ask the general, because I wasn't with him at that time, but was there the notion that at some point in the future this would be adjudicated with Congress?
Yes, indeed. And by the way, it was only for 2 months, and then they had to do it again.
Renewals, that's right. They had to be renewed. Yes, there was time limits on this authority being granted. 60-day authorities, yes.
Yes.
Let me follow up on that and even back up for a second here. Mark, you talked about this unilateral executive, I think you called it executive.
Unitary executive theory.
Unitary executive theory. And that we may go back to the norm, you called it, beyond the Trump MAGA era. Two thoughts came to mind here. Norms are not laws, right? So I don't know if we'll go back to norms or not, as long as people are willing to get away with, or people can get away with what they can get away with. Take us back for a second. How much of that is unitary executive theory is something that just came out of the White House, or how much of that is related to the Supreme Court decision that pretty much exonerates the president of anything he does?
So that Supreme Court decision, without a doubt, is emboldening Donald Trump and probably those around him, even though we don't know the scope of its application. Would it apply to an attorney general, for example? Right now, it only applies to the president, effectively says anything official in nature, you will have immunity for. Any president, doesn't matter who. That's dangerous in my view. Hopefully the Supreme Court will revisit it at some point in time. But, what would be a norm? Like, a norm would be that, as far as an example, the independence of the Justice Department from the White House, not receiving direction from the White House, not receiving, a late night tweet or what would have been a private message to the Attorney General as to why aren't you going after my perceived or actual political enemies. And, to hear General Hayden say he's scared of this administration and would do things different, people should wake up and listen to that. To hear a former NSA, CIA director and deputy director of the DNI say they are scared of this current administration is unbelievable and eye-opening. I'm not surprised by it. Of course, I know the general's opinion about this. I share it. But, to have an administration where loyalty and sort of, I don't know if it's I'm trying to think how the word would be pronounced, but, sycophants, sycophancy? I don't know. I can't say that word. I'm not sure what it would be. I might be making it up. But to have people in these positions who act as if their loyalty is to not the Constitution, but the president, the individual, is a very scary thought and was contrary to what the founding fathers wanted in our country in setting up three branches of government that are supposed to be sort of, in a circle with arrows going around and going in between, that they can all oversee each other and keep them in check. And the unitary executive theory does away with that complete model so that you would have, and do to some extent, thankfully there's a level of incompetence in this administration that hasn't seen it manifested into how bad it could get. But we'll see. We're early on, right?
Pretty sad that we're talking about incompetence here that is saving the damage that could have been done.
Yeah, even just with the revocation of my own security and Larry's security clearances.
Do you still have them? Do you still have them, or did you all lose yours?
I have mine back because we sued and was able to prevail. But the notion that an agency, the direction from the president, from the White House to an agency to take an action, and that's the final rule, is where we are now. And the danger that can arise from that, especially in a democracy where they call themselves the greatest transparency administration, and they're anything but. They're transparent, I guess, in that they use Signal openly to have classified conversations in an unclassified, non-secure format. But that's not the kind of transparency that we actually want from U.S. government officials.
Can we go back to those norms without a reversal of that of the Supreme Court decision? Regardless of who the president is, we can have the number one moral next president come in, having that power in his or her hand, and saying, I can do whatever I want to do.
Yeah, so I'll give you another example, concrete to what we're all talking about here, and is ongoing right now. So what would be an example? Use of the Espionage Act, which is a poorly named statute that goes back 100 years, because we all want to stop espionage in what we think and understand espionage to be. But the Espionage Act also protects unauthorized disclosures, or can be used against. So against a Snowden, against a Manning, against anyone who leaks classified information to the media, even if their motives are totally sound, even if the information was something the public should know. Let's take the most, worst situation that absolutely would want to know. But journalists were typically, I'll use the word immune, not legally immune, immune by norm. The U.S. government would not go after a journalist, a recipient of what's called national defense information, classified information under the statute. They would go after only the leaker. And they would even stay away from subpoenaing journalists' phone records or surveilling them. And every once in a while, an administration, including Democrats, would step over that line and change that norm and do something. And when they got caught or it was exposed, the norm would shift back and the policy would change so that the Obama administration, the Biden administration said, we're staying away from journalists. Trump administration, that line has been passed. Now, in fact, as we're taping this, the Wall Street Journal and other media entities have received subpoenas for information about classified and unclassified leaks. A Washington Post reporter home was searched by FBI agents because she received what is likely national defense information from an NSA employee or contractor. That would never have happened in past administrations, Republican or Democrat. That's a norm that has changed. Now, that norm could absolutely be reinstated by the next administration. They can issue new attorney general guidelines, and I'm sure they will. But then when another Trump-like individual comes down the line, boom, those norms can be thrown out once again.
It's very important. I was done with CIA, okay? But I was on 60 Minutes, okay? And they talked about something like this, okay? And I said, yes, that was the bad that they had the papers knew this. But then I said, so it was Risen, okay?
James Risen, New York Times reporter.
Yeah. And they said, boy, you were really mad at them, weren't you? You want to do something about it. And I said, absolutely not. The press is really important, period.
Those norms have changed, General, as Mark just said, unfortunately.
So, hey, so we've talked about the Department of Justice and issues there and politicization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. But I think, well, I'll ask the question to you, General.
Yeah.
And maybe a little more germane to our topic here is the intel community. Do you see, or do you fear politicization of the intel agencies, the staff, the personnel, or the leadership?
Absolutely. And that's very sad because it's bad for America. It's bad for intelligence. It's bad for CIA and NSA again, So when at the first time Trump was elected, people would come to the McLean family restaurant and they would say, I'm really worried. What do I do? What do I do? And I said, go back to work.
Right.
Just go back to work.
To keep your nose to the grindstone, yeah.
Right. Now I go to the McLean family restaurant now and say, what to do. And unfortunately, what I would say, get out. Don't do this. Do something else. Because and that's sad. It's very sad. But that's what so I talked to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, different people, and all of them had their clearance gone. Their clearance gone. Why? Well, because they did their job.
Right. Yes, we have actually had individuals who provided what we used to refer to as the inconvenient fact.
Yep.
Part of the job of an intelligence agency and intelligence officers is to be able to go to a policymaker, to a national leader, and tell them things they don't really want to hear, because it's important that they get as close to the ground truth as possible about a situation so they can then make rational decisions around the use of power.
Right.
And we've had individuals in this administration who have lost their jobs at the very senior leadership level, but even at a mid analytic level, have lost their jobs because they provided information to the intel community that perhaps then got leaked by somebody and became a public embarrassment to the administration. And these individuals were then relieved. I'm sure, Mark, you've probably had clients who are in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Individuals who have been fired, particularly from the FBI, because they worked on January 6 investigations or they worked on the Mar-a-Lago case. I have individuals who were seniors at the agency, at the CIA, who worked on Russia assessments in 2016, 2017, are now being pulled before grand juries as to whether or not there was some grand conspiracy against Donald Trump to interfere with his election back at the time. It is a very, very different world right now, at least in the United States. I explain all the time the notion of, we've had our problems in our country over the years, over the course of our 250 years. But I think this is the first, separate apart from the Civil War, the first time there is a national situation that is really impacting everyone with respect to the weakness and undermining of the rule of law and democracy. Growing up in Long Island, New York City area, as a Jewish American, I never experienced anti-Semitism. Back, if I had gone into the South in the 50s and 60s, totally different story. Same African Americans. You can pick your whichever, whether gender or race or religion. But what we're dealing with in this discussion is something that impacts everyone around the United States. Some of them may not feel it at this point in time, but it's impacting them. And that's where the dangers really arise. And we'll see where we're going. As we're doing this, as we're taping this, President Trump is in China. And I was listening to one commentator talking about how China is viewing itself as on the rise right now. It is ascending in power while it's watching us, particularly demonstrated by the Trump administration, completely descending away from democracy. That's a very tragic description, and sadly, perhaps quite a bit of validity to it.
So I know David probably wants to move on to another topic, but one more question from me, and then both General, you and Mark, I think, can weigh in on this. There are some who may be listening to this podcast who are saying, "Hey, come on, give me a break. The President of the United States should have the ability and the authority to decide if somebody can be trusted with secrets and therefore should have a clearance. And if they're in sensitive posts, particularly to get into the minutiae here, if there's individuals who are in what's called the accepted service, or if they're political appointees, these are people who serve at the pleasure of the president. The president can fire them without even giving a reason. Shouldn't the president have that authority and ability? And if the answer is yes, then what's wrong with what they've done with some of these employees or appointees today?
So it's a yes, but answer. And there are provisions in the existing law, both issued by the President of the United States previously, going back to going back for the entire national security system, as well as statutory language where clearances can be revoked without any due process. Right? Robert Hansen, Aldrich Ames, people who are actually accused of espionage, they lose their clearances right off the bat. They don't get due process administratively to challenge their clearance. They go through court as to whether or not they're guilty of espionage. But the provisions allow for when national security is certified to be at interest, that the reasons can't even be shared. That's a different situation. For folks like the three of us who had our clearances revoked for nothing but politicization of it, either because you signed a letter about Hunter Biden's laptop or you represented a whistleblower, we are entitled by law to due process. I mean, there's nothing national security about that. and we would be entitled to notice and an opportunity to appear and defend. And look, there are a lot of times. I mean, the CIA, I say all the time, is the worst agency to defend, or, defend as the lawyer a security clearance case. We rarely overturn them. We do at times, without a doubt. But it's a very difficult exercise. But there is that due process. Right now, there's nothing. And it's very clear that it's been demonstrated that this is nothing but retribution, retaliation, vindictiveness to strike at perceived and even actual political enemies. And
Mark,
that
I think
supposedly separates us.
I think we all agree on that part. And I do want to move on to different topics, but I'm also going to follow up on Larry's question. That's on taken away. And we all agree that everybody's entitled to a due process. If they haven't done anything wrong, quote unquote, they shouldn't lose that right not right, but that privilege of having security clearance that fits within their normal day jobs and in support of the country. But part of the layer question as well was, and that could be to either one of you, General or Mark, is shouldn't the president be able to give that security clearance to anyone he needs to be on his team, period?
Well, and no one has challenged that. I mean, President Trump gave, as reported in the news, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, access to classified information, right. Even though there were issues with his clearance with some of the agencies. The president can declassify an original declassification authority. When General Hayden was at NSA and CIA, he could go like that. Yep. To certain information, to declassify it. That's the prerogative of the individual who has that authority. And there's really not been, people, you can debate should that have been the choice made, but no one has really has argued that the president or a leader in that position shouldn't have that lawful authority. It's actually more on the revocation denial side, where the due process and democracy comes into play. Yep.
I agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, General.
The argument could be made that there are organs of the government that do adjudication reviews of individuals' suitability for clearances. And those organizations then they then report back to whoever's trying to hire or grant that privilege. Hey, here are our concerns as to why you would probably not want to give that person access to sensitive classified information. But if the individual, the president or a CIA director, says, no, I hear you, but I need this person to do this job, it can move forward, but it is then documented that decision happened.
Yep.
Despite the fact that they were advised. And that could come back to bite them in the butt at some later date if it turns out the individual was abusing that privilege.
Now, the interesting hypothetical, which I'm sure will be in fiction novelized fiction right now, would be, because the Supreme Court decision of immunity to Trump, what if the president of the United States gave classified information to a foreign adversary for sale, or for whatever reason? How does that play out? Because of the accepted authority that the president of the United States can declassify, with snap of their fingers, but yet, did something that would be so illegal under the Espionage Act. It's not necessarily a hypothetical any longer, at least by way of concern in today's climate.
We're going to leave the answer to that one to a different episode at a different time, Mark, because we could spend an hour just talking about that. I'm fascinated, and I have 100 more questions to ask you all, but we are running out of time. I do want to get your advice to students in a minute, but I'm going to take literally 1 minute, quick answers. The General, you were among the first in the nation to talk about cyber threats to this country.
Yep.
In layman's term, in very layman's term, in 30 seconds each, are we safe? Are we okay? Are we in red level danger? Where are we today?
It's really important, and no, it's not okay at all. IA is very important. AI, yes, yeah. Thank you. I was there 6 years at CIA NSA, right? I'm glad I'm not there, really, because every time something's going on, and it's harder and harder and harder to do that. I'm really sad about that.
Yeah,
Mark and Larry, any input on the cyber threats that we're facing today?
So it's absolutely vital that we, the United States of America, remain in the lead on issues of cybersecurity, on issues of AI, on issues of encryption, and most importantly, in the issue of quantum computing. Quantum computing is the next level of computing that is going to increase the speed of a computer to the point where it will be able to break just about it. The fear is it will be able to break just about any encryption model that has been developed to date. Now, you got a cat going there, Mark. We so far have been successful in staying ahead of the computing curve for our most sensitive secrets. But I will tell you, our adversaries, China, Russia, and others, have been collecting our encrypted communications for decades, and they've just been sticking them in a vault or a computer or a storage space. There will come a day when quantum computing will reach a level of speed and ability where they will be able to crack the codes that were used for decades in our country and in other countries. And there will be material that will become suddenly available to our adversary.
That was more than 30 seconds, co-host.
I'm sorry, to both use and understand what we're doing, and also to challenge us. So it's vitally important that institutions like the Schar School and George Mason University educate and inform our students about those threats and what they need to do to mitigate them. Sorry.
No,
I'll stick to the time really quickly. I'm incredibly concerned of what our future is going to be. I'll give two specific reasons. One, deep fake AI and how realistic it is. It will be used by our government against other governments, which we could say, okay, maybe that's a good thing, but it's going to be used against us. It's going to be used against by political parties in the United States against one another. It's going to be incredibly dangerous because how do you tell the difference? Secondly, whereas we used to be the world superpower, particularly because of our military might, now some 20-year-old sitting in some nothing country could figure out some way to disable our electric grid, our water power system, whatever it might be, with a push of a button. And are we prepared for that? And thank God it supposedly hasn't happened yet. We'll see. But that's the stuff of nightmares that's coming within our lifetime. Well, it's here.
Thank you. I had a whole section prepared, and I wanted to ask you a bunch of questions on advice to students and being future public servants and what temperaments fits within this line of work. But the general just said a few minutes ago that he's telling people at breakfast, get out of this work that are in there. So again, let's do another 30 seconds each round. Should our students, General, get into this line of work or should they not today?
No, they could do it exactly right. But maybe a lot of times the private sector is doing extensive work. And so maybe the private sector will be a really good idea. Now, later on, maybe it'll be good for CIA, NSA, and so on. But the private sector is there as well.
Yeah,
Larry, you want to follow up on that? And what's that going to cost? I'll give you 60 seconds versus 30 on this one because I'm going to add a follow-on on it. Isn't that going to be a brain drain and the effect of that on the agencies?
No, it's not. Because it's America, not the government.
Got it.
Yeah. So the ability of our country, both from a private sector perspective and a public sector perspective, to exploit open source information, to harness AI to create efficiencies, to harness computing ability to create efficiencies in collection, processing, and analysis is going to hopefully keep us ahead of the curve. But that's why it's vitally important for students, I think, to focus on a couple of things. One, understand the technologies, understand how they can be applied, and so you're looking at policy students. I'm not telling you got to become an engineer, but you need to understand what these capabilities can do for you. Critical thinking, still vitally important. Focus on your ability to critically think, analyze, process, and communicate your findings. That's always going to be vitally important. And as the general said, there are a lot of avenues out in the private sector right now for students to learn and hone and craft these skills.
Mark?
Yeah, as I said, although I haven't served in the federal government, I am a huge proponent of public service. In fact, I wish there was a mandatory requirement of some level of public service. Doesn't have to be military. It could be any type of other civilian work within a public sector field, state, local, state, federal, whatever. I give my advice to clients now. I have these conversations like General Hayden does with students as well as those inside the government, is you need to just understand and determine where your line is legally and ethically. And those may be the same, but they might be different as well. As long as you don't cross that line wherever you place it, please do go ahead and serve. We need good people in the government. And the Hayden Center for students and the SHAR and GMU as in general, make use of it. Go talk to people who served in prior administrations. Go to these events, meet these individuals, ask questions, utilize these opportunities, especially being a student in this geographical area where there is so much wealth of knowledge, to be able to go and talk to someone and just ask for a cup of coffee. Ask to have an online conversation is so easy, obviously now. And, invest that time so that you can make a difference in the future, because we're really going to need it as we rebuild what democracy we have left.
Thank you, gentlemen. General Hayden, Mark, Larry, thank you for a very, very thoughtful and timely conversation. This is the last episode of Season 1 of Policy and Governance Perspectives podcast. I had the honor of hosting this podcast for the year for the SHAR School, and it is a dual honor for me to end my my job as a host of this chain of podcasts with you, gentlemen. For our listeners, we'll include links in the show notes to the Michael Hayden Center for Intelligence, Policy, and International Security, as well as resources related to national security law, whistleblowers, and public accountability. We will also add links to Mark's center and information on how to reach Mark Zaid. Hopefully you do not need his services when you're in a tough spot, but we will add that information in there. And my co-host and colleague Larry can be found as well on the GMU website, and we will add it there. You can find this episode and all previous episodes of Policy and Governance Perspectives at char.gmu.edu/podcast or wherever you get your podcast. I'm David Ramadan. There is no next time for me on this one, but please stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, in a democracy, national security and public trust must move together. Have a blessed day.
That brings us to the end of another insightful episode of Policy and Governance Perspectives. We truly appreciate you joining us for these important discussions featuring voices from across the SHAR School. For more information and to explore our archive of past episodes, please visit char.gmu.edu/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to sharing more with you next time.